Jack Turner stared at his computer screen, his fingers still hovering above the keyboard as he wrapped up the final lines of code for the project he had been working on for weeks. The late hours he had spent in front of his screen, the sacrifices he had made, all of it was about to pay off. A project he was proud of, one that he had put his heart into, was finally complete. His work was going to make a difference. But as he clicked save and leaned back in his chair, the silence of the office filled his ears. It was the perfect moment to call it a day. He grabbed his phone to check for any notifications, and that's when he saw it. A message from his boss. "Jack, I need to see you in my office. Right now." Jack's heart sank for a second. He had been with the company for over a decade, and in all that time, he had never received a message like that. Sure, he had been called into his boss's office for performance reviews or the occasional casual chat, but this time felt different. The pit in his stomach grew, but he tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just a quick discussion about the project. He stood up, walked to the office door, and took one last look around the workspace. The place where he had spent countless hours building code, solving problems, and helping clients grow. This office had once felt like home. He made his way down the hallway and knocked on the door to Mark West's office. "Come in," Mark's voice called out. Jack stepped in and found his boss sitting behind his desk, his eyes focused on his computer screen. Claire, the finance manager, was sitting across the room, flipping through a few papers. "Take a seat, Jack," Mark said, his tone more serious than usual. Jack could tell something was off, but he sat down, trying to mask the nerves creeping up his spine. "Sure, Mark. What's up?" Jack asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Mark looked up at Jack, his face expressionless. Claire's eyes met Jack's for a moment, but she quickly looked away. There was an unsettling tension in the air, something Jack couldn't quite put his finger on. "I wanted to talk to you about your position here," Mark began, leaning back in his chair. "We've had some discussions, and after careful consideration, we've decided to let you go. Effective immediately." Jack blinked, unsure if he heard correctly. "What do you mean, let me go? Why?" His voice cracked slightly, but he tried to remain calm. "This couldn't be happening," Mark sighed, glancing down at the papers on his desk. "It's nothing personal, Jack. You've been a great asset to the team, but frankly, your salary's become too much for us to handle. We're scaling down, and the higher-ups decided that we need to cut back on costs. You're just too expensive for what we can afford right now." Jack's world seemed to come to a screeching halt. He had worked tirelessly for years, had sacrificed nights, weekends, everything for this company. And now he was being told that he was too expensive? "This doesn't make sense," Jack said, his voice a little shaky now. "I've been here for over a decade, working on every major project you've had. My work has brought in millions for this company. How can you just throw all that away?" Mark didn't respond immediately. He glanced at Claire, who still remained silent. Then Mark turned back to Jack, his eyes cold and distant. "Things change, Jack. We're facing budget cuts, and we have to make tough decisions. Unfortunately, yours is one of them. The decision is final." Jack felt the anger bubbling up inside him, but he swallowed it down. He had never imagined his career would end like this, in a cold office, with his accomplishments being reduced to a mere line item on a spreadsheet. He couldn't believe it. "I've given everything to this place," Jack muttered under his breath, but loud enough for Mark to hear. "And this is how you repay me?" Mark didn't flinch. "We're grateful for all your hard work, Jack. You've done well, but this is business." The words stung, harder than anything Jack had ever experienced. This wasn't just a job. It was his life's work, his passion. He had built this company from the ground up, pouring his soul into the code, into the long hours, into the relationships with clients and colleagues. And now, in a single moment, it was all gone. Jack stood up, his mind racing. "Fine," he said, his voice steady now, but the fury was building in his chest. "I'm done here, but I will make sure you understand the consequences of this decision." Without another word, he turned and walked out of the office. As he passed through the halls, he could feel the eyes of his coworkers on him, whispers following his every step. He had always been the guy who everyone looked up to, but now he was the one being pushed out. The elevator ride down felt like an eternity. Jack stared at his reflection in the polished metal doors. He didn't recognize the man staring back at him, the man who had just been fired, the man who had just been discarded. But there was something else. A fire inside him was starting to burn. He wasn't going to let this be the end. The first few hours after Jack left the office were a blur. His mind raced, spinning in circles as he drove aimlessly around town, trying to wrap his head around what had just happened. The anger inside him was simmering, but it wasn't the kind of rage that made him want to lash out blindly. No, Jack was more calculated than that. He didn't want to just get mad. He wanted to get even. By the time he parked his car in front of his apartment, the storm inside him had begun to settle. Jack took a deep breath, stepping out of the car and into the quiet evening. The city buzzed around him, but it felt like everything had changed. He was no longer just a tech guy at a company. Now, he had something else. He had purpose. He walked up to his apartment, entered, and threw his jacket on the couch. His eyes immediately fell on his laptop sitting on the kitchen counter. The one place he always turned to for answers. The place where he had solved countless problems over the years. Now, it would be his tool for something bigger. Jack sat down, cracking his knuckles before opening the lid of the laptop. His fingers hovered above the keyboard for a moment. He wasn't just going to sit back and wallow in his anger. He wasn't going to let Mark and Claire think they could just throw him away and walk away unscathed. Jack had learned something over the years. Revenge was best served cold, and it was most effective when it was smart, calculated. He wasn't going to go into this blindly. He was going to make sure his comeback was not just a success, but a statement. He opened up a browser and began searching for anything that could help him. Former colleagues, connections he had made through the years. One thing was certain. He had the skills, the resources, and the drive. The only thing missing was the plan. Hours passed. Jack compiled data, gathered information, and started laying the groundwork. His mind was clear now. He wasn't going to destroy his former company in some impulsive act. No, he was going to build something better, something they would regret losing. By the time the sun came up, Jack had a plan. He wasn't just going to start his own company. He was going to make sure that it was better than anything Mark and the others could offer. He would take their clients, their employees, and their reputation. He would build it all from the ground up, and when it was time, he would watch them fall. But there was something else he needed to consider. Revenge wasn't just about business. It was personal now. Mark had taken something from him, and Jack wasn't the type of man to let that go without a fight. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. "They're going to regret this," he muttered to himself. It wasn't just about getting his career back. It was about showing them that they had made the wrong decision. About proving that Jack Turner was not someone to be tossed aside. In the weeks that followed, Jack threw himself into his new venture with relentless focus. He poured everything he had, time, money, energy, into building his company from the ground up. Every day was an all-out hustle. He worked day and night, and soon he had a small but talented team of engineers who were just as eager to make a name for themselves. The excitement in the office was palpable. Everyone knew they were working on something big, something that would challenge the status quo. Jack's plan was simple. Build a tech company that didn't just deliver on its promises, but exceeded every expectation. He wanted to create software that companies would beg for, solutions that would outperform anything his old company had ever offered. He carefully reached out to his network, tapping into former colleagues, clients, and contacts from his years at Pinnacle Innovations. One by one, people began to take notice. Some were skeptical, but most were intrigued. Jack wasn't just starting a business. He was creating a movement. Days turned into weeks, and soon his small startup had landed its first major client. That was the breakthrough Jack needed. With one successful contract, his company was now on the map. It was a huge win, and the validation Jack had been searching for. His team worked around the clock to deliver, and when the project was completed ahead of schedule and under budget, it was clear they had something special. The client was thrilled, and the word began to spread. But even as things were looking up for Jack, there was always the shadow of his past looming over him. Mark West, his former boss, hadn't given up on trying to crush Jack's comeback. Jack had heard rumors that Pinnacle Innovations had been struggling ever since he left. The company wasn't the same without his expertise, and they were losing clients left and right. Mark had made a series of poor decisions, cutting costs in all the wrong areas. As Jack's new company grew, he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction, knowing that his decision to leave was beginning to pay off. One morning, Jack received an unexpected phone call. It was from Claire, the finance manager who had stood by Mark's decision to fire him. "Jack, it's been a while," Claire said, her voice tight and hesitant. "We need your help." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Help? After everything that happened?" "I know this sounds bad, but hear me out," Claire continued. "Things at Pinnacle are falling apart. Clients are pulling out, and we can't keep up with the competition. Mark has made some serious mistakes, and now we need someone with your expertise to fix things. We need you back. It's not about the money, it's about saving the company." Jack sat back in his chair, his mind racing. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. The moment when the people who had tossed him aside would come crawling back, realizing how wrong they were. He had the upper hand now, and the power was in his hands. But the temptation to return to Pinnacle wasn't enough to sway Jack. This wasn't about redemption for him anymore. It was about proving that he didn't need them. He had built something new, something better. And he wasn't about to sacrifice that for the sake of a company that had betrayed him. "I'm sorry, Claire," Jack said, his voice steady, "but I'm not coming back. I've moved on, and I'm doing just fine without Pinnacle. You're going to have to find someone else to fix your mess." Jack hung up the phone and exhaled slowly. It wasn't about pride or revenge. It was about the satisfaction of knowing that he had taken control of his own fate. His company was thriving, and no one could take that away from him. As Jack looked out the window of his office, he smiled. It wasn't just about making money or beating Pinnacle at their own game. It was about the journey, about proving to himself that he was capable of more than just surviving. He was capable of rising from the ashes, stronger than ever. As the months passed, Jack's company, Turner Tech, continued to soar. With each new client and each new project, his reputation in the tech world grew stronger. Word had gotten around. Jack Turner wasn't just another software engineer. He was a visionary. Companies that once overlooked him now saw him out. It felt good to be wanted. It felt even better to be successful on his own terms. But as Jack built his empire, the specter of Pinnacle Innovations remained. Mark West had continued to stubbornly run the company into the ground, unwilling to admit that his decisions had led to its decline. Every time Jack received a report on Pinnacle's worsening financial situation, he felt a dark sense of satisfaction. His old colleagues, those who had once disrespected him, dismissed his worth, were now watching as Jack surpassed them, as his company became a leader in the industry. One chilly autumn afternoon, Jack sat in his office, reviewing a proposal for a new partnership, when an unexpected visitor showed up. It was Claire. She stood in the doorway, hesitating for a moment before walking in. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Claire," he asked, genuinely surprised, "what brings you here?" She walked into the office, her expression tense and apologetic. "I know you probably didn't expect to see me again," she began, her voice quiet. "But I couldn't just sit back and watch Pinnacle fall apart without trying one last time to fix things." Jack leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. He wasn't sure what to make of this. Claire had always been professional, but this was different. He had moved on. His company was thriving, and now here she was, asking for his help. "Claire, you're late to the party. I've built something new, something better," Jack said, his tone firm but not unkind. "I don't need Pinnacle. I don't need anyone who thought I was expendable. You made your choice, and so did I." Claire's eyes flickered with a mix of regret and desperation. "I know I made a mistake, Jack, and I know I was part of the reason you left. But you're the only one who can save us. Mark won't listen to anyone else. The company is collapsing, and if we don't do something soon, it will be over. We've lost major clients, our stocks are crashing, and no one in the company is capable of turning it around. We need your expertise." Jack stood up from his desk and walked over to the window. He stared out at the city below, his mind racing. The temptation was there. He had the power to fix Pinnacle. He had the knowledge, the skills, the experience to take over and rebuild what was once his. It was everything he had dreamed of when he started. A chance to not just be a part of a company, but to be the one in control. But as he looked out the window, he saw the reflection of the man he had become. He had built Turner Tech from scratch. He had found his own path. And more than anything, he realized that he didn't need Pinnacle. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. What he had created was his, and it was enough. "No," Jack said, turning to face Claire. "I'm not going back to Pinnacle. I'm done with that chapter of my life. You should be too. It's time to move forward, not backward." Claire stood still, her shoulders slumping slightly. "I understand," she said softly, "but I had to ask. I had to at least try." Jack could see the frustration in her eyes, but he wasn't going to give in. He had built something of his own, something far more valuable than Pinnacle's collapsing empire. With a deep breath, Jack softened slightly. "I wish you the best, Claire, but it's time to let go." Claire nodded, her face pale but resigned. "I'm sorry for everything, Jack. Truly." As she left his office, Jack stood there for a moment, letting the weight of the situation settle in. He had made the right choice. He had won. He had taken his destiny into his own hands and refused to let anyone, especially the people who had underestimated him, control his future. That night, Jack sat at his desk, staring at the skyline as the city lights twinkled in the distance. He knew he had made the right call. It wasn't about money or success anymore. It was about proving to himself that he could rise from the ashes and create something lasting. Something that didn't rely on the mistakes of others. Something that was entirely his own. He had won. And now he was free. The weeks following Claire's visit passed in a blur of meetings, new projects, and client calls. Jack had his hands full at Turner Tech, but he couldn't shake the thought of Pinnacle's downfall. Despite his determination to leave that part of his life behind, there was a part of him that couldn't help but wonder, what would it have been like if he had gone back to Pinnacle? What if he could have taken control, turned everything around, and shown them who was truly capable? But deep down, he knew that wasn't the path he wanted. His success was no longer about proving his worth to Mark or anyone else from Pinnacle. It was about proving to himself that he could rise on his own without relying on the company he had once given his all to. Turner Tech was his creation, and nothing could change that. Still, the temptation to show Mark and the others what they had lost lingered. He didn't need to go back to Pinnacle, but he wanted them to see that they were wrong about him. They had written him off, discarded him like he was nothing. And now his company was thriving. But was that enough? One day, as Jack was meeting with a potential client in the conference room, his phone buzzed. He excused himself for a moment and checked the message. It was from an unknown number, and the message simply read, "Mark West wants to meet. You know where." Jack's heart skipped a beat. Mark had never reached out to him since Jack left. And now, after all this time, he wanted to meet. Jack couldn't help but feel a rush of adrenaline. Was this finally the moment he had been waiting for? The moment when Mark would realize what he had lost? Or was it something else entirely? A trap, perhaps? Jack wasn't sure, but he knew one thing. He wasn't about to back down now. He immediately called back. "Hello?" Jack answered, his voice steady but tinged with curiosity. "Jack?" Mark's voice was familiar but distant. "I know we haven't spoken in a while, but I think we need to talk. I need your expertise. We're at a critical point at Pinnacle, and, well, things aren't looking good. Come by my office. We need to discuss how we can fix this." Jack was silent for a moment, the weight of the situation sinking in. He had spent so many nights fantasizing about this moment, the moment Mark came crawling back, needing him. But now that it was happening, Jack wasn't sure what to feel. "Why should I help you?" Jack said, his tone sharp but controlled. "You threw me out like I was nothing. Now you need me? After everything that happened, after everything you've done?" Mark sighed. "I get it, Jack. I understand why you're angry. But I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm asking for your help. Pinnacle's in trouble. I've made mistakes. But this isn't about me anymore. It's about saving the company, saving what we built. You're the only one who can do that." Jack's pulse quickened. He could hear the desperation in Mark's voice, the desperation of a man who knew he had failed, a man who could no longer deny that Jack had been right all along. Jack took a deep breath. He wasn't ready to forgive, but part of him couldn't deny the opportunity this presented. Could he really walk away from this? Could he leave Mark and the rest of Pinnacle to fend for themselves? Or was this the perfect moment to take everything he had worked for to the next level? "All right," Jack said, his voice even. "I'll come by. But don't think for a second that I'm doing this for you. I'm doing this for myself, and I'll be running the show." Mark didn't hesitate. "I understand, Jack. I'll be waiting." The call ended, and Jack stood there, holding his phone in his hand. He wasn't sure what he was walking into. Was it a chance for redemption? Or was it just another test, another opportunity to prove that he was better than the people who had tried to hold him back? Either way, one thing was certain. This meeting would change everything. Jack leaned back in his chair, thinking about the journey he had been on. He had worked tirelessly to build Turner Tech, and now the very people who had once rejected him were asking for his help. But helping them wasn't the end goal. Jack had already won. He had built his empire. This was about showing them, once and for all, who was in control. Jack walked through the doors of Pinnacle Innovations, his old workplace, but now it felt like a lifetime ago. His heart no longer raced with nerves or excitement. He had long moved past the need to prove himself here. He knew what he had achieved. Turner Tech was thriving, and this meeting, with all its tension and history, was just another stepping stone in his journey. Mark West, looking disheveled and desperate, stood up from behind his desk as Jack entered. "Jack, I'm glad you came. We're at a breaking point. I need you to help fix Pinnacle. We've made mistakes. Hell, I've made mistakes, but I'm asking you for old time's sake. Help us." Jack looked at him, a flicker of sympathy crossing his mind, but it quickly faded. He had heard this story before. The same people who had dismissed him, overlooked his talent, were now begging for his expertise. They had tossed him aside, and now they wanted him to fix the mess they had created. With a deep breath, Jack spoke, his voice calm but firm. "You didn't value me back then, Mark. You didn't listen when I had ideas, when I was trying to make things work. You wrote me off like I was nothing, and now you want me to help you? No, I'm not going to be your backup plan. I'm not going to fix your mistakes." Mark's face fell. Jack, I know. I get it. I messed up, but we're drowning here. Please, this is our last chance. Jack crossed his arms, his resolve unshakable. I'm done. I don't need Pinnacle anymore. I built something that works, something I can be proud of. You had your chance. And now I'm moving forward. Mark stayed silent, the weight of Jack's words settling over him. Jack turned to leave, but before he stepped out of the office, he paused and looked back. You should really start thinking about who you trust, Mark. You've surrounded yourself with the wrong people, and that's why you're where you are. Jack walked out of the office, leaving Mark behind in the company he had once helped build. He didn't feel victorious. He didn't need to. Jack already knew that his success wasn't about proving anything to the people who had doubted him. It was about building something that was his, from the ground up. And he had done that. As he stepped outside, Jack felt a wave of relief wash over him. He didn't need to fix Pinnacle. He had already fixed himself.